I'm Bill Leipold, and welcome to this edition of Breakfast at the Barracks. Joining me today is Maurice J. Elias, professor of psychology at Rutgers, New Brunswick. Maurice, welcome to the show.
Thanks.
I want to kind of jump right in because I think you have a fascinating topic that you're researching. Talk to me about your research and the social-emotional work that you do with students and children.
Well, for the past literally 30 years since I've been at Rutgers, we focused on children's social, emotional, and character development. Big concern of how kids are growing up in today's world. And one of the things that we want to do as researchers and action researchers is figure out what is it that kids really need to grow up healthy, have good, successful school and post-school careers, and then how do we help that happen? How do we make school and home environments, places that are really going to nurture kids? Not so simple today.
Well, I guess out of that initial thing, there are two things that jump out for me. The first thing is I actually want to know kind of what you've discovered so far and kind of the policy implications. But I also want to talk about this idea of action research, because it's one of those things that I'm not so sure most folks understand. So you can kind of describe what action research is.
Sure. And
kind of how it relates to kind of what you're doing.
Sure. When we do our research and we have a lab, or what we call our social emotional learning lab, our lab is really out in the field. It's in the schools. And we go into the schools and we test our theories in the schools. So if, for example, we believe that problem-solving skills are essential for kids to grow up healthy, we will go and develop ways of teaching problem-solving skills. We will test whether or not it makes kids healthier, get those results, see what we have to do to improve the teaching, try it again, get the results, try it again. So action research is a process of testing out your ideas in the real world, taking the results and improving them continuously to make your work better and better. So we do that in the schools specifically to design programs to improve kids' social and emotional and character development.
So while you're putting theory into practice, the next conversation is your collaboration with the school districts, or your collaboration with the school, because it sounds to me as though you're paying attention to what a teacher is doing in the environment that they're creating.
Yes, not only what the teachers are doing, but actually the way the whole school comes together to create a climate for the kids.
Okay.
In fact, the work that's going on now suggests that one of the most important factors for kids is the extent to which they're in a climate where they are respected by their classmates, by the teachers. And in fact, when kids are in a climate of respect, you see very little bullying, harassment, and all those kinds of things that are very much in the news right now.
Right.
Not only that, it's very important for the school to create opportunities for kids to participate. You know, the days of kids really learning by sitting and absorbing, I mean, that doesn't work for today's kids. They need to participate, not just in the classroom, student government, service learning, working out in the community, helping peers who might be younger than they are or perhaps who have developmental challenges or disabilities. In the schools are places where kids really learn about life and how to conduct themselves as future citizens, not simply places where they get educated about content area. That's why we talk about character development.
Okay, so from that, you're working with the school, so how do you work with the school? Because it seems to me sometimes schools are a little closed or can be just a little difficult to listen to feedback. So talk to me about the relationship you create with the school in terms of how that happens.
Sure. Well, one of the fields that I'm involved with is called community psychology. And one of the tenets of community psychology is developing collaborative partnerships, which means you can't just go in and do your thing. You have to take time to understand the school that you want to work with. You have to develop a respectful relationship. And you have to really have a genuine partnership so that me, as the university researcher, doesn't call all the shots. I develop programs and processes together with schools. Later today, I'm going to be meeting with representatives from about 6 or 7 schools from around New Jersey with whom we have monthly collaborative meetings to design, develop, and evaluate social and emotional programs that they're doing in their schools.
Now, you keep on using the word we, so I'm assuming your lab doesn't just consist of you, so to speak, since it's out there. So can you talk a little bit about who's in your lab and kind of who helps you with this work?
Sure. Well, the we consists mainly of our wonderful graduate students in clinical psychology and school psychology in both our PhD and PsyD programs. So there are a number of graduate students. And an army, literally an army of about 40 or 50 undergraduates that go out into the schools, and they are just fantastic. They work directly with kids. They help us with assessments. They are in the lab working with our data. It really is a great team. And then I'm also involved with a group called CASTLE, the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, which is a national organization doing the same work. So now we are able to, you know, thanks to the internet, we're able to collaborate almost as if we were, I was on one campus at Rutgers and someone was on another campus. So I have colleagues in Illinois and literally around the country working together on common projects. So the we is really quite a collective network.
Okay. So let's go back to the main, I think the important folk, the students, in terms of the students who are kind of studying, doing some research with, and changing their environment. You talked a little bit about the climate perspective in terms of kind of what's important with that. Can you talk to us a little bit about what's important in the climate? Because we kind of rushed through it.
Yeah, well, no, you know, what I said earlier really are the two most essential things. It's creating a climate of respect. The research shows so clearly that if kids are in an environment where they don't feel respected and safe, teachers could be doing the best curriculum in the world, but kids won't get it. It's just like you could be broadcasting wonderful television or radio programs, but if the receiver is not on,
no one's paying attention.
No, they won't even hear it.
Right.
And this is what happens in schools. And so educators are now realizing, slowly but surely, that the best way to close the achievement gap and prepare our kids for future success involves creating an environment where they feel respected by the people who are working with them.
Let's talk about the definition of respect. I think it has lots of connotations for lots of folks. So from your research and from the team's research, how does respect defined with regards to how students define that and see that?
Well, first of all, it means, in a sense, it's the sophisticated version of the golden rule. It's treating others the way you would want to be treated yourself. It means not being put down. It means not being physically harmed or threatened. It means being asked your opinion in a genuine way and being listened to genuinely when you speak, with someone sort of doing what a good interviewer does, and that is repeating back to show that they've actually heard what you have to say, and they care what you have to say. They didn't just ask a question for the sake of, you know, asking a question. Respect involves not only students and teachers, but it involves students with students. It means a school where, whether you have a handicap or whether you have ethnic differences, you still treat each other in a positive, accepting kind of way. And what's interesting that we also found is that students watch whether the teachers respect one another. And if the teachers don't respect one another, the students discount what the teachers teach them. Isn't that interesting?
That is interesting, and I want to go back to that because the conversation here is, it's great to have a vision of kind of what you just talked about. The question is, how have schools or school districts implemented either policies, assessment measures to kind of figure out how to measure the respect level that students are seeing, anticipating, and really are experiencing?
Well, in literally hundreds of schools, we do school climate assessment. And there are instruments that literally do measure exactly what we're talking about. And that's, of course, how we have found out about their importance. Respect the extent to which students feel they have a say, that what they're learning is relevant to them. All those things are questions that literally you can ask students, and they will answer. And we ask this anonymously because we want students to be able to feel free to answer without any fear of penalty. And we also ask staff members the same questions. And compiling all that information, we were able to draw these kinds of conclusions.
Before the cameras went on, you and I were talking about social emotional research. So the conversation is, can you just give us a little background on social emotional research and kind of how what we're talking about is really relevant to kind of the factors in terms of it started in education and then kind of found its way to organizational development?
You know, I think this is a case where we work backwards in a sense, looking at successful people. And in fact, the Wall Street Journal did a very interesting analysis of who seems to be leading a number of the Wall Street organizations and law firms. Turns out it's not the people who are getting straight A's. It turns out that if you're not getting straight A's, maybe you're getting A minuses, B pluses, you've also allowed yourself time to develop the life and leadership skills that you need. So what we find when we look back on people who are successful, and this also includes people who have successful marriages, people who are involved in citizens groups and social justice, that they are good problem solvers, that they have empathy for one another, that they understand consequences long and short term, not only for themselves, but for the people around them.
All right.
And most important, they're tuned into emotions. We're finding that emotional, what we call emotional competence, is really the key to success in school and in life. Kids come into school, and a lot of times they're not emotionally ready to learn. They've had difficult time in their household. And that really goes across all socioeconomic levels. People are so rushed and crazy and hurried, and kids are running and rushing. And by the time they come to school and catch their breath, sometimes their teachers are already 20 minutes into the first lesson.
Okay.
But they're not into their first lesson. So one of the things that research has shown is that when kids have an opportunity to come into school and have 10 or 15 minutes just to kind of get settled before the lessons get going, they actually learn more. So the paradox is a little less instructional time yields a little more achievement.
Okay.
Because the kids have to be emotionally ready to learn. And that's why when schools are not safe, kids can't learn.
Well, so here's the interesting context for me in terms of we seem to teach a lot of teacher education tends to be on curriculum development, doesn't tend to be on emotional readiness or kind of understanding some of those emotional contexts. So how do you kind of make that shift?
Well, this is the policy question you were alluding to earlier. And we have been working with the State Department of Education and more schools, and in fact several counties in New Jersey, including Hudson County and Morris County, have established consortia of schools specifically to promote social, emotional, and character development on an equal footing with intellectual development.
Okay.
These folks have recognized that it can be actually very dangerous to have very smart kids with a very poor character.
Right.
And when you start to think of it that way, you realize that we don't have the choice of making kids smart or good. We have to have both.
Okay.
And schools can do that because there are a number of schools in New Jersey that we've worked with, as well as around the country, known as National Schools of Character, that have in fact maintained academic excellence, as well as social, emotional, and character development. So it's doable.
Okay.
And as a matter of policy now, we have to, I think, be prepared to take the steps to move forward with that, which requires a commitment of a number of years, because it takes at least 3 to 5 years to turn a school around, to change a school's culture. And so if one is looking for results in a year or two, you won't find them.
Right.
And so that's why it takes a policy commitment and what we call courageous leadership to move in this direction.
All right, my producer's yelling in my ear. I want to make sure we give a chance for folks to be able to see that. There are several publications which are out there. How can folks get these publications? Do you have a website they can go to?
Actually, I don't.
Okay.
But there's good old Amazon.com.
All right.
And that's probably the easiest way to get any publication.
So what we need to do is just plug in Maurice J. Elias. You can find it on Amazon.com, be able to find some of the information. Listen, we need to go. Time's up. My producer's kind of pulling me off. So I appreciate your being here.
My pleasure.
Fascinating conversation. I appreciate it immensely.
Thank you.
That's all the time we have for now. Thanks. We'll be right back. Hello, I'm Bill Leipold, and welcome to this edition of Breakfast at the Barracks. Joining me is Sandra Simpkins, Clinical Associate Professor of Law at Rutgers-Camden. Sandra, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Right now, you are, if I'm correct, the Director or the Clinical Associate Professor in charge of the Rutgers Children's Justice Center.
That's right.
So can you talk to me a little bit about what the center does and its mission?
Yes, and so what we do is we represent kids who get arrested in Camden County and some of the surrounding counties. And so we have third-year law students who actually handle the entire case, and they are the lawyers on the case. They're certified by the Supreme Court, and we're a community service, and so we're free, of course, but if a child gets arrested and has a case in delinquency court, they can ask the clinic to represent those children.
So Are they given your clinic's name upon arrest when they ask for a public defender, or how does that happen?
We get referrals from a variety of sources. We have a website, and at this point we have a lot of community referrals. People have heard about us and just ask for us by name.
On average, in a year, do you have a kind of a number of folks you represent in numbers?
Probably 100 kids.
Wow. And anything that goes from a small offense, alleged small offense, to a large alleged offense? Or?
That's right. So we have a huge variety of cases. Some of them are very small retail theft kinds of cases, a bike theft, and then we have very serious complex cases as well.
So talk to me about a third-year law student. Is certified by the Supreme Court. How do they go about being certified? How does that happen for them?
Well, they have to have a certain number of credits. We have to make sure that they've had professional responsibility and evidence, and we have to make sure that they've, that they are qualified. And so we have an application process.
Okay.
And then once that happens, their name gets sent to the Supreme Court, and they're certified under our supervision. Myself and my co-director, J.C. Lohr, we are always supervising them. So they never appear in court without us. In fact, they can't appear in court without us.
Well, that's my next question in terms of, you said they represent that student, that child who is in need. So my response was, are they by themselves on this case, or how are they kind of working with you in terms of the case?
So they assume full ownership of the case. They will be interviewing the client on their own. They will be creating a trial strategy. But when they're in court, whenever they're in court, they have to be with a licensed practicing attorney, and so that's myself. But in order to make sure that they know exactly what they're doing, we have a classroom component, and then we meet with each student team every single week to go over their supervision and to make sure that they're, not missing anything.
So it's kind of a case approach. So what you do is you sit with the student and kind of go over what are the merits of the case, what's the interview, helping them create their strategy. So they kind of take the lead, but you're kind of an advisor, so to speak.
Absolutely.
So they seek you out for potential legal strategies, a whole bunch of different things.
Right, but it's really important that it's their case, and so I interfere as little as possible, because that's really the learning model. If they were just watching me do it, it's a completely different experience. I want them to have the practice of dealing with the judge, negotiating with the prosecutor, figuring out what investigation needs to happen. And so, we try to take a back seat and be as undirective as we can.
Your background's really interesting in terms of what you had done before. So can you kind of explain to our viewers your history, so to speak, or your experience and kind of how you got to Rutgers?
Yes, well, I have a great job now. I love my job, but before I was a clinical professor, I worked for 15 years as a public defender in Philadelphia, and I helped run the juvenile unit, and there was 25 attorneys and investigators and social workers, and I handled all kinds of cases in Philadelphia. So I come to the clinic with a lot of experience, which is a good thing. And so no matter what happens, I've seen it before, I'm able to support the students, I can handle it. And it's really helpful to have that breadth of experience. So no matter what comes up, it's going to be okay.
So from your history in terms of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Camden and surrounding areas, what are some of the major issues that are just facing some of our students, our children who are going into the juvenile system?
Well, I think one of the big things is that the juvenile justice system is so much more punitive than it was, say, 10 or 15 years ago. It used to be that, you came into juvenile court and it never really counted. It wouldn't be on your adult record. It's not like that at all now. The laws are drastically different. A juvenile adjudication, when you come into juvenile court, can have long-range consequences for a child. And I think that's one of the biggest myths that people don't understand. It's not just kiddie court. It doesn't go away when you turn 18. And so when a child gets put on probation for something, it could impact, where they go to college, whether or not they're able to get into the Army, what kind of job they're able to get. It does have long-range consequences.
A lot of research has been done on the criminal justice system from sociologists, from criminologists, in terms of family dynamics, especially when it comes to juvenile justice system and juvenile delinquency. Is that part of what you all are seeing in terms of your day-to-day case
Absolutely.
loads?
I mean, it's really tragic. I mean, Camden is one of the poorest cities in the country, as you know. The statistics were that 1 in 3 children in Camden ends up getting arrested, which is just huge. And so many of these children come from really difficult backgrounds. There's a lot of family issues. There's incredible poverty. There are problems in the school system. All of that coalesces, within the kid, and usually leads to some bad choices and bad behavior. And then now they're, being criminalized in the juvenile justice system.
So,
The other thing is that I can't leave out is that so frequently, kids, there are mental health issues, there are unidentified special education issues. So these are really vulnerable kids. It's easy to just label these kids as bad and not want to deal with them. But when you do this work, you see it's much more complicated than that. And one of the challenges we have is to deal with the kid and the whole family system.
Which is kind of what my next question was going to, and I think you just added to that question. So we recognize in some of what you're doing, some of the dysfunctions, whether it be family or whether it might be they're dealing with a mental illness or a learning disability, and they're kind of acting out in some ways.
Right.
So how, as a third-year student or a center, do you kind of navigate in getting a student who might be in the system some help in those ways? Because it seems to me that's the complex part of it.
Getting the child some help?
Yes.
Yeah. I think it all starts with a really thorough interview, and we really encourage the students to figure out what's driving the behavior. So, okay, so Johnny's smoking pot, okay? So Johnny goes to school high a lot. Why? Why is Johnny needing to get high every day? So if you figure out what's driving the behavior, you have a much greater opportunity for success. If you just send the kid to drug treatment without understanding, what are the stressors? What is pushing that kid to want to self-medicate in that way, to not want to try in school? If you approach it from that angle, you're usually able to develop a better treatment plan for the kid.
So you're really not just being legal advisor to the students in need in the system, but you're also in some ways being a counselor, a resource person, a negotiator with them in terms of services. You're kind of doing all those things for them.
Right. And so we're always thinking about the best possible outcome for the kid right from the beginning. And we're thinking about what the kid's needs and strengths are and making that part of our plan. One of the beauties of the juvenile justice system is it's about rehabilitation. It's not about punishment. And so everybody wins if this kid doesn't come back. And so if we can figure out what the kid needs so they don't come back to the juvenile justice system, everybody wins.
Speaking of recidivism, in terms of coming back in, how often does your center see people who are repeat offenders come back into your area to ask for help?
Unfortunately, quite a bit.
Okay.
And we've had several clients who have gotten arrested again, and we continue to represent them, and it's unfortunate. And I think it's one of the real gaps that we have in the juvenile justice system because we don't know what works. We don't have a clear understanding of what treatment programs are really effective at treating particular problems.
Okay. A lot of what you've also done is provide national outreach, not just from your center, but personally, in terms of kind of working nationally. So explain to me how you kind of synergize your local Camden perspective and your national work along with your students.
It's really cool because so much of why I have a national focus comes from the individual cases. And so when I was in Philadelphia, I was really, really focused on girls' issues, how girls got into the juvenile justice system and what could be done about that. Right now, my real passion is post-disposition representation, and what that means is after the case is over, the kid leaves the courtroom and the judge says, I want you to go to X placement. I want to make sure that what happens in that placement is what is good for the kid and what the judge actually intended. And so I want to visit that kid and make sure things are going well. And so nationally, I've been able to work with the MacArthur Foundation and the Office of the Public Defender to bring post-disposition representation to the state of New Jersey, which is really exciting.
I'm going to ask you, so is that what this is about?
No.
Okay. So we're going to talk about Sandra's book right now. So I want to make sure that folks can get this on Amazon.com or any national online book provider. So talk a little bit about your book, because I think it's really important.
Okay. The book is really my effort to reach out to parents. One of the missing links, I think, is that parents really don't get it. And I have had phone calls from parents of all tax brackets to say, my kid got arrested, or I think my kid's going to get arrested, what should I do? And so it's hard to find a specialist, somebody who really knows juvenile law. It's rare.
Right.
And that book was my attempt to put everything I know into a book. And on page 1, it's if you only have 5 minutes, if you only have 5 minutes and you really don't have time for this book, this is what I want every parent to know. And one of those is you should not have your kid speak to the police department or be interrogated by law enforcement without having a lawyer there.
So you're really, in this book, bringing together your whole history in terms of what you're doing.
Right.
And kind of advising parents
Right.
on how to work with their child
Right.
if they should find themselves in this position.
Right. And hopefully they won't. But unlike a medical emergency, a parent is never prepared for when a kid gets arrested. And there's a lot of shame attached to that, and they don't know where to go. And so I wanted to have a very accessible book, that someone could pick up and get information from.
So let's go back. I'm sorry. We jumped in with this. We didn't
That's
kind
okay.
of wrap up your other work, especially with girls. And so your national work really worked around at that particular point on girls. How has that really worked in your favor, especially with Camden folks? Because, you know, folks don't really know the gender breakdown in terms of some of the issues that happen juvenile justice-wise in the Camden County area.
Yeah, girls, it was great to work with girls. Because the juvenile justice system was really designed with boys in mind, and girls are an afterthought.
Right.
And so here they are, and the girl population has exploded tremendously. So in the past 15 years, more girls have come into the juvenile justice system than, you know, on all offenses than boys. And we really don't know what to do with them. You know, it used to be that you could just paint a room pink and add a cosmetology program and it would be fine. So a lot of work has been done on girls. I think that for me, I now have a much better understanding on where that girl is coming from and the pathways of how girls get there. The statistics are really awful.
Right.
Like 90% of girls have been sexually abused who are in the juvenile justice system. There's huge trauma. And again, back to, you know, Janie smoking pot.
Right.
Yeah, Janie has a drug problem, but why does she have a drug problem? And if you can address the trauma, you'll have a better chance of, again, her not being a recidivist.
So if folks have questions for you, if folks have a need to contact your center because it's the first time they're hearing the show, is there a website that they can go to? Is there someone they can talk to about that?
Yes, it's on, well, my information is online, and if you go to Rutgers School of Law Camden, under the clinic program, the Children's Justice Clinic is right there.
All right, we'll make a promise to our viewers to also post that information up
Okay,
there.
good.
No problem. Thanks for joining us today. It's all the time we have. This was great to have you here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
No problem. So, for more information about any of the subjects we've discussed here today, please visit our website at rutgers.tv. For all of us at the Rutgers Division of Continuing Studies, I'm Bill Leipold, and thanks for watching.